Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnayos Kesubos. Excuse me. Parak Zayin, chapter 7, Mishnah Ches, Mishnah 8. Okay, so the previous Mishnah had discussed that if a woman has physical blemishes, which the husband was not aware of, so he can divorce her without giving her a ksuba. Now, and we're talking about the kinds of blemishes that a man would typically be bothered by, which we said would be the same blemishes that a Kohen is invalidated to be able to do the service in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Gemara lists other ones also. Now, discussion of the Mishnah is going to be a situation where we really don't know when were there defects there. You know, if he makes a condition with her, I'm Makadishu, I'm marrying you, and the condition you don't have any defects. Okay, that means she doesn't have the defects at the time when the condition was made. But how about if we don't know when those defects came? Maybe they developed after. Maybe they developed after he already married her, and then and if they developed after he married her, too bad on you. You know, at the end of the day, you married her, she was okay, and then the things developed later. That doesn't give you a right to divorce her without a ksuba. So if the case was when we know that they were there at the time of the kedushin, we know that he can say this was a mistake. If it happened after the marriage, then it's done with. You know, at the end of the day, it's his this is his mazel, and that's it. But now the question is, when we don't know at what point it came, when did these blemishes develop? So therefore, the Mishnah says like this: let's say she had these blemishes while she is still in her father's house. Meaning, the case is he made kedushin, the man made kedushin, and we're talking about specifically in this case of the Mishnah where we're involving the father. The father is having domain over her. That means we're talking about that the girl is a nara. She's from the age of 12 and a half. She's between 12 and 12 and a half or younger. And at that point of time, she's in her father's jurisdiction for marriage. He marries her off. He accepts her kedushin. And the truth is that once she goes to the chuppah, so after kedushin, she's still in her father's domain. Once she gets married, she considered out of her father's domain. So here the situation is that the women were discovered while it was already after kedushin, but it was before the chuppah, it was before the completion of the marriage. So she's still in her father's domain. So it comes out that the blemishes were found while in her father's domain. In that situation, the Mishnah says, so Ab Tzarach Lahavi Ra'aya, the father has to bring a proof, Sheshaminis Arisa no Mumin Halalu, that these blemishes developed once she was already Mureses. He had already done the Kiddushin, already married her. He has to prove that those things developed after the marriage took place, after the Erisin took place. We're talking about before the Chuppah, but as we've mentioned many times before, Erisin is a marriage. And he has to prove that these blemishes developed after the Erisin. V'nistab chasadeyu. And therefore, so to speak, the field of the husband got flooded. You know, if you buy a field from someone, right? You buy a field. And then a flood comes and ruins the field. You know, it's not the seller's fault. You bought it. You can't go back to the seller and say, "Hey, my field got flooded." That wasn't the seller's responsibility, and it's unfortunate. It's your misfortune. So if he's able to prove that these blemishes came after the marriage took place, after the erisin took place, then we say to the husband, "Look, this is your mazel. These blemishes came after the marriage, and when the marriage was made, there were no blemishes." But the Mishnah is saying that at this point in time, while she is still in her father's domain, it's on the father to prove that these blemishes came after the erisin. And if he proves that, then if the man is going to give her a get, he has to give her a ksuba too, because nobody tricked anybody, no one misled anyone. Now, there's a couple of points that have to be brought out here. Number one, why is it the father's responsibility to have to prove it? The answer is, we have a rule, which we mentioned many times before. You take money away from someone, the burden of proof is on you. He's the muhsik. The money is in his domain. You want to take it away from him, you got to prove it. So now we have a question. This man, he wants to divorce his wife because of the blemishes. Does he have to give her a ksuba or not? It depends. Were the blemishes there before the erisin, or did the blemishes come after the erisin? That's our doubt. Now, the point of the doubt is that can the father, who again, the daughter right now is still in her father's jurisdiction, can he demand ksuba payment from him when he divorces his daughter? Well, there's a doubt. We don't know. Does he owe the ksuba or not? So who has the burden of proof to prove that, whether he has to pay the ksuba or not? The person wants to take the money away from him, which is the father. And therefore, we say that the proof has to be brought by the father that the blemishes were there, the blemishes developed after the erisin. Now, there's one more point that has to be brought out here, and that's the following. We mentioned the word chazaka, which we can loosely translate as an established status, means that we assume something was the way it started until we know it changed. So now, here's this girl. She developed blemishes. She wasn't born with them. She developed them. Now, her chazaka, her starting status was she had no blemishes. Now we discover a blemish. We don't know when it developed. But the principle of chazaka, the principle of your starting status, says that starting status remains until you know it changed. Now, in this case, we don't actually know when the blemishes developed or not. But when did we find the blemishes? We found the blemishes now. And if we found the blemishes now, then what's called her cheskas haguf, then because of the starting status of her physical body, she was not born with the blemishes. We didn't know the blemishes until now. That law, that halacha, that principle should say, that should be the principle that says, when it developed? Now, not before. And we find previously a concept like that kind of a chazaka will allow a woman to demand a ksuba from her husband. Meaning, even though you're going in and taking away money from him, and the burden of proof is on you, well, guess what my proof is? My proof is the chazaka. The proof is the starting status of her physical body. She was not born with these blemishes. We only found them now. The principle of chazaka should say that they developed now. And that should determine to say, okay, that means they developed after the marriage, after the erisin. He's going to divorce her. He's going to give her a ksuba. Why don't we say that here? And now that the answer is because we have a different principle. And that principle is, I'm going to read it to you from here. The Gemara answers that there is a legal assumption which states that if we do not know when a change occurred, it presumably occurred in the same domain as the one in which it was discovered. Kan nimtza kan haya, which means it was found here, and here is where it always was. In the Mishna's case, this means that since the defects were first found during the period of betrothal, when the bride was still in her father's domain, we must strongly consider the possibility that they were present the entire time that she was in his domain, even before the betrothal. This is enough to weaken the father's claim and to prevent him from taking money out from the husband's possession. We've got a lot of moving parts here. But at the end of the day, the Gemara says what's going to decide and say that the burden of proof is on the father is the fact that since the blemishes were found in his domain, meaning by the father, then there's a principle that says, kanim sakanhaya. You found it here in this domain. We assume this is where it's always been. And if this is where it's always been, that's enough now to say to create strong doubts on the father's claim that the blemishes came after the betrothal. And therefore, at the end of the day, we're left with a suffix, we're left with a doubt. If there's a doubt and I want to take money away from you, who's got to prove it? I do if I'm taking the money. And therefore, at the end of the day, the Mishnah says it's the father's responsibility to have to go ahead and prove that the blemishes developed after the erisin. Otherwise, if he can't prove that, the husband can say they were there before. He can say they were there before, or perhaps they're at the end of the day, if he can't prove that the blemishes came after the betrothal, so he's not able to take the money away from the husband to take the ksuba money if he divorced the daughter, because the burden of proof. You want to take the money away from him. The burden of proof is on you. And all the other arguments we made before kind of work their way through. That at the end we're left with a doubt. The burden is upon the father because he's taking the money away from the husband. If he doesn't prove it, the husband does not have to pay the ksuba. We will continue this next time, Mitzvah Hashem. Okay. Now, continuing with this discussion about the partner. Okay, actually, we're starting a new case. The partnership case is done. Next case is like this. If you see a person wants to make a shidduch with another person, he wants to go ahead and marry his child to somebody else's child. And you know that the chassan, he's got some very, very serious shortcomings. So here it is. You've got a daughter. You're looking to make a shidduch with someone else's son. And you know that this son, right, has lots of serious problems, shortcomings to him. The other side, the girl's side, has no idea about this. And were you to know about it, he never would agree. So therefore we say that's something that you should tell him. There are many details to this. Many conditions have to be met before you can do that. And therefore you have to pay good attention to all these conditions before you allow yourself to do this. Meaning essentially, this is something that you'd be allowed to do. However, as we say, the devil's in the details. There's a lot more details and conditions that have to be dealt with before you can do that. And also, just because in this case you can be lenient to tell someone about, someone else's shortcomings, doesn't mean you can now derive from there for another case. Okay, all right, and we will pick it up from here. But again, the new case of the Chofetz Chaim is now in a case where someone wants to marry his daughter off to a man, and there are shortcomings, very serious shortcomings in that man. It's something essentially you need to tell the father of the girl. But you have many, many conditions that have to be kept and have to be seriously considered. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you very much.
That's a problem,